The waters around the Red Sea are becoming murkier. It's threatening to become the color of red. Case in point, the mystery around two US Navy SEALs. SEALs are among the most feared naval commandos in the world. You may remember this force as the one that took down Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, Pakistan in 2011. America says two of its SEALs are lost at sea. The story begins on the 11th of January, in the dead of night, off the coast of Somalia. American troops were patrolling the high seas. They spotted a boat bound for Yemen. It was a small boat, what's called a dhow. This boat was unflagged. It was reportedly carrying Iranian advanced conventional weapons. US Navy SEALs intercepted a dhow. They used helicopters, drones. SEALs boarded the boat and seized the weapons. What weapons did they find? Components of Iran-made ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. There were propulsion, guidance and warheads for medium-range ballistic missiles. Also, parts of anti-ship cruise missiles. The commandos recovered the parts, sunk the dhow and detained its crew. The US Central Command issued a statement about the operation. It said, and I'm quoting here, "The first seizure of lethal Iranian-supplied advanced conventional weapons to the Houthis since the beginning of Houthi attacks against merchant ships in November 2023. Later, it was revealed that two US Navy SEALs were lost in sea during these operations. Question: how do highly trained elite soldiers just get lost at sea? The US military has an explanation. It says the SEALs approached the dhow in a small special operations combat boat. At 8 p.m. local time, the SEALs were boarding the dhow. The sea was choppy. American media reports say one commando slipped off the boarding ladder or was swept away by a high wave. Another dived in after him because that's what the protocol for such an incident is. If one soldier falls into the sea, another dives in to save him. In this case, both the commandos disappeared. These SEALs were based on the USS Lewis Puller. We are now being told that a search and rescue operation followed. Troops from the US, Japan and Spain spent 10 days looking for the two SEALs. Air and naval units were roped in. Oceanographers, weather experts were deployed. They searched 21,000 square miles, but the two commandos were not found. Here's what the CENTCOM commander, General Eric Kurilla, has to say now. "We mourn the loss of our two naval special warfare warriors and we will forever honor their sacrifice and example. Our prayers are with the SEALs' families, friends, the US Navy and the entire special operations community during this time." A lot does not add up here. First, it is hard to believe that the US Navy SEALs can just disappear at sea. They can drown. We are talking about an elite force here. US Navy SEALs are among the world's most feared and highly trained naval commandos. SEALs carry out reconnaissance and covert operations. They are trained to be mentally strong, to refuse to quit. They are called SEALs because they can operate in sea, air and land. They undergo some of the most rigorous training in military history, including underwater training. They are pushed to the end of their physical limits. And guess what? To become a US Navy SEAL, you need to pass a physical examination required for Navy divers. And here, the US wants us to believe that not one, but two of its SEALs disappeared at sea. Here's what else makes this story hard to believe. The US Central Command only issued a statement about the operation and the missing SEALs on the 16th of January, full 5 days after the incident. This is a statement. It quotes the US CENTCOM commander as saying, "We are conducting an exhaustive search for our missing teammates." And now look at the Central Command's Twitter handle. If you scroll through it, you will notice that the Central Command has been extremely prompt in posting updates on all the action at high sea. Every morning, CENTCOM posts about what's happened overnight. But on the morning of the 12th, it had no word on the overnight operation aboard the dhow. Remember, on the night of January 11th, there was something else that was happening. US forces, along with forces of the UK, were bombing Houthi targets in Yemen. Are we to believe this operation overshadowed what happened aboard the dhow? Or was America trying to cover up something? Are America's elite commandos not trained to handle high waves and choppy seas? Are they not equipped to save a teammate's life? These are important questions. The US Central Command has now declared the two SEALs dead. Here's the statement. We regret to announce that after a 10-day exhaustive search, our 2 missing US Navy SEALs have not been located and their status has been changed to deceased. Out of respect for their families, no further information will be released at this time. This is a post by the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. He says, "We mourn the loss of our 2 brave SEALs and our hearts are with their families. The entire department is united in sorrow today." Quick question. Are they also united in hiding something? Perhaps the truth. Our next story is from Alabama, the cotton state of America. It is planning to use a new method of execution soon, a method that will involve the use of nitrogen gas. Yes, Alabama is planning to put an inmate to death with nitrogen gas or through a process called nitrogen hypoxia. If carried out, this would be the first new method of execution since lethal injections were introduced back in 1982. Let's take you through what we know so far. What the process is, how it is implemented, the criticism against it, and who is the person being meted this punishment. To start with, what is nitrogen hypoxia? Well, it's a process which causes death by forcing the inmate to breathe pure nitrogen. This deprives him or her of oxygen that is needed to maintain basic bodily functions. The theory behind this is that the changing of the composition of air to 100% nitrogen causes a person to lose consciousness and then die from a lack of oxygen. Whom is Alabama using this process on? This man, Kenneth Eugene Smith, a 58-year-old murderer for hire. He was one of the 2 men convicted for the 1988 murder of a preacher's wife. According to prosecutors, Smith and 1 more man were each paid $1,000 to kill Elizabeth Sennett on behalf of her husband, who was deeply in debt and wanted to collect insurance money, so he got his wife killed. In 2022, Alabama tried to execute Smith by a lethal injection. He was even taken to the execution chamber, but the state called off the process because of technical issues. You see, the convict was strapped to the deathbed for nearly 4 hours, but escaped death. This time, he won't be so lucky. The state plans to place a respiratory-type face mask over Smith's nose and mouth. The mask will then replace breathable air with nitrogen, causing him to die from lack of oxygen. Has this process been used before? The answer is no. No American state has used nitrogen hypoxia to carry out a death sentence. However, there are 3 states which have authorized this practice. They're Oklahoma, Mississippi, and Alabama. Now, here's the thing. The death penalty has existed as a punishment for crimes since a millennia. But the first historically recorded death sentence occurred in the 16th century BC Egypt. This is when a wrongdoer and a member of nobility was accused of magic and ordered to take his own life. In the 14th century BC, the Hittite code prescribed the death penalty. In the 7th century BC, the draconian code of Athens made death the penalty for every crime committed. In the 5th century BC, the Roman law of 12 tables codified the death penalty. In all these cases, the death penalty was different for the nobility, freemen, and slaves. In fact, the Romans had a curious punishment for someone who murdered their parent. The condemned was submerged in water in a sack, which also contained a dog, a rooster, a viper, and an ape. But the most notorious death sentence in history was in 399 BC. This is when Greek philosopher Socrates was required to drink poison over corruption charges. Cut to the present, and the methods of execution have evolved. Different countries have different methods. To start with, some countries use shooting to execute convicts. It typically involves a prisoner being bound to a chair as shooters aim for their heart from a distance away. This is practiced in countries like China, Indonesia, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Taiwan, and Yemen. Then we have beheading. It is a form of execution that is common in Saudi Arabia. It carries out beheadings publicly using a sword, usually in a town square, publicly, or close to a prison. Crimes punishable by death in Saudi Arabia include adultery, blasphemy, fornication, homosexuality, and sorcery. And then in the United States, some common types of executions are lethal injection and electrocution. In the case of electrocution, a prisoner is shaved and strapped to a chair. A metal skull cap-shaped electrode is then attached to their scalp, and a jolt of 500 to 2,000 volts, which lasts for about 30 seconds, is administered till the prisoner is declared dead. The process of using nitrogen will mark a first, but critics are calling it a cruel punishment. This includes the United Nations. A top UN human rights official has said that the planned execution amounts to torture. Will that stop authorities from going forward? Only time will tell. From one plane to another, this one flies faster than the speed of sound. Yes, you heard it right. The new quiet supersonic plane X-59 is here. It is a brainchild of Lockheed Martin and NASA. They are trying to bring back supersonic travel, and they plan to demonstrate it via the new X-59. So what are the features of this new aircraft? What is it worth? Is it the future of aviation? Will it change commercial air travel? Our next report brings you all these details.
The X-59 supersonic aircraft is here. It is also known by the name Son of Concorde. A week ago it was rolled out by NASA and Lockheed Martin. Let's take a look at its features. The aircraft stands almost 100 feet long and 30 feet wide. Almost a third of the jet's length is made up by its thin and tapered nose. Why so? We'll get to that in a while. The plane's cockpit is located about halfway down its length. Because of this, pilots would have to rely on camera monitors to fly it. As for speed, the aircraft is expected to fly at 1.4 times the speed of sound. That is almost 1,500 kilometers per hour. To put that into perspective, if the X-59 took off from New York City, it would land in London in the next 3.5 hours. Sounds promising, doesn't it? But there are many concerns around supersonic jets. So much so that in the last 50 years, the US and other nations have banned supersonic flights. Remember the Concorde aircraft? It was the first supersonic commercial passenger airplane. It could travel some 2,200 kilometers per hour. It took to the sky in 1976 for the first time, but less than 3 decades later it was permanently grounded. Why so? You see, the Concorde was plagued by costly maintenance. It also suffered a fatal crash in the year 2000. Not to forget, whenever the Concorde flew, it left a trail of thunderous sonic boom behind it. That is, by and large, the biggest concern. When planes exceed the speed of sound, they create startling sonic booms. For those unversed, a sonic boom is a loud noise left behind by a high-speed aircraft. It is as loud as thunder or an explosion. The Concorde couldn't fly for long, but now its sun is here. How is it any different? Will it not create any sonic booms? The answer lies in the nose. As I told you, the X-59 has a long, thin and tapered nose. Scientists expect it to break up the shock waves that would otherwise cause a sonic boom. The plane's mouth underside would also support that. The X-59 is part of NASA's Quest mission. Through this mission, the space agency aims to make its case in front of the regulators. It wants them to reconsider the ban on supersonic aircraft. The ultimate goal is to make commercial supersonic flight possible. As of now, the X-59 is in experimental stage. Its creators say the plane doesn't make a sonic boom, but a soft thump. It will take to skies later in the year. After the maiden voyage, it will make its first quiet supersonic flight. And when it does that, the plane would collect data from the people below to find out if the sonic thump is acceptable. This data will decide the fate of the X-59. Will the US and international regulation authorities lift the ban on supersonic commercial planes? Will supersonic travel return soon? We'll have to wait and watch.